Hey, deserving listeners, let's continue watching the trial. Let's watch.
I felt beautiful in it. Like, stupid as that sounds, I felt pretty in this dress I picked out, and I showed it him because it's a carpet, it's red carpet, so it's like, publicized, and I kind of thought it was weird he wasn't saying anything about it. I left him to go do this red carpet, and I was like, did you see the event I went to? Basically, I felt pretty, and I thought, like, did you see that? I wanted him to say something about that, I guess. And he said, well, this is after he stopped talking to me for some time, didn't tell me why. When he came back in my life, he wouldn't explain why he was acting different. He just kind of acted mad at me, didn't know what I had done wrong. And when I brought up the dress and the event, because it was an event to support a charity I was really involved with at the time, and I said, did you see that thing? And he said, yeah, I think the whole world saw that kid. That's how they'll remember you. That's how the world will remember you. And I was like, oh, come on. I mean, it's like, but I felt good in it.
Okay, so there's a lot of things I could say about this event. She is telling a story about how they were having a difficult time in their relationship. She says that he disappeared for a while and he came back and they weren't talking for some reason. Now, I'm just going to take a guess and say that they had a major conflict and he ran away, however you want to put that, took a break from the relationship, helped her to cool off, whatever phrase you want to put there, avoided. And when he got back, he was still resentful. This is one of the things about avoidant attachment style that is problematic, in that the person who has avoidant attachment style often will claim that they are normal and that they are level-headed, that they're strong, that they don't have emotions that are out of control. And when they're in a fight, they tend to run away. They frame it until they get insight in therapy or some other method. They tend to frame it like, well, they're crazy and I'm normal, so I'm going to go away. But what's likely happening on the inside is a tremendous amount of hurt and fear about what's happening in the relationship, and they can't cope with it, so they run. But they frame it as, I'm doing us both a favor. Now, certainly you can, an avoidant person or even a secure person can take a break as a favor in a healthy way when there's conflict. Sometimes, and especially with the conflict we've heard them engage in, both of them should have said, there's no point in us continuing with this conversation. One or both of us is triggered, so let's take a break. So there's nothing wrong with taking a break, but it's often the narrative because the avoidant individual is actually really, really hurt and really, really angry and really, really scared. But oftentimes they're not even aware of it. And that's something maybe I haven't emphasized enough, is that for people with avoidant attachment, they don't avoid their feelings consciously. Some of them don't even know they exist. And you ask them if they have feelings, they're like, no, even though they are exhibiting a lot of emotion. It'd sort of be like someone gets out of the pool and you're like, you say to someone, oh, you're really wet. Do you need a towel? And they're like, huh? What water? What are you talking about? Well, you're all wet. I'm not wet. What are you talking about? It's literally that disjointed. And the person is not aware. They learned when they were young to cut themselves off from their body because their body was telling them emotions. That's where our emotions come from, is physical sensations, often on our chest and our gut, our neck, our breathing, our diaphragm, our muscle tension, our hands, sweatiness, urges to run, this kind of thing. And if you are trying subconsciously to avoid your feelings because no one cares about your feelings when you're being raised in this sort of environment, you just neurologically learn, I just can't have conscious attention on these things. And so they don't know. And so they leave and they come back and they're seething with anger and hurt and fear, but they will come to the other person and say, are you done yet? Have you calmed down? That kind of thing. And if you're the recipient of that, you might even say, oh, you still have feelings, right? I don't have feelings. You're the one with feelings. And that's another part of it, is there's an inner conflict for the avoidant individual that was generally neglected growing up, that they actually hate themselves for having emotions. And this goes back to when they were 18 months old. So it's a very primitive defense of emotions are bad. I hate myself for having emotions, but they can't really deal with that internal conflict. So they'll project one side of that, often the emotional side, onto someone else, and they'll fall in love with someone like that often. And they will yell at the emotional one as having too many emotions when it's them that hates themselves for having emotions, if that makes sense. And that's almost always the case with avoidant people. There's very few things that I will say are almost always the case. Whenever I talk about borderline or histrionic, there certainly are some commonalities that I could say, but a lot of things you hear me say, well, not maybe like 40% of borderlines will exhibit this. Almost all, if not all, avoidant attached individuals will exhibit what I'm talking about. And so, I don't know, but it sounds like he might have been going through a situation like that. He comes back. She's going to an event for charity. And just a little side note about the charity, because I've seen clips, because up ahead when she's cross-examined, they ask her, how come you promised to give money to a charity and you didn't do so? And her responses were something like, well, I had learned by that point that I was being sued, so I needed to hold on to that money in case I lost the lawsuit, or I have to pay for these lawyers. And I think that's a viable excuse, honestly. Was she lying the whole time? I don't know. I mean, certainly the headlines, it just looks like, oh, another lie by Amber. And it, absolutely could be. There's no way for us to know. But I think what bolsters her case and her credibility is that she's always been into charity. We heard her talk about how she was desperate to get out of the house, and so for years when she was a teen, she would volunteer her time with people in need, and that was a big part of her identity. And I'm sure that's how people saw her. I mean, just imagine if you have a friend in high school that spends as much time as they can, free time as they can, in a soup kitchen or a food bank or whatever. I mean, just imagine you have a friend like, you'd be like, wow, because most people don't ever even do that once, let alone, it sounded like, frequently, maybe throughout the week. And that tells me that when she was, getting money from the divorce from Johnny Depp, well, that's the wrong way to put it. That's a misogynistic way to put it. The way to put it is that she was going through a divorce. The two of them are going through a divorce, and there's a standard protocol often in various different states. It depends, but there's a standard protocol in terms of how to divvy up the assets, and she had rights to their couple assets, and so Johnny didn't give her money. And that's often the narrative, which is like, well, Johnny gave her, I don't know, something like $7 million or something. And it's like, nope, that's not legally accurate. The legal accurate description is they, as a couple, earned money and acquired assets, and when they split, she took some of it and he took some of it. So she acquired the $7 million, which was hers to begin with. Johnny didn't give it to her, and had pledged to donate the entirety of it to charity, like $3.5 million in one and $3.5 million to another. And then she never did. And I was thinking when I saw those headlines, I'm like, well, you never know what that person could have been going through. She might have inadvertently pledged it in the beginning because she didn't know what, the thing to remember, and I keep trying to remind myself, she met Johnny Depp when she was 22. I think they started dating when she was 23. So she probably didn't know that she shouldn't pledge that, because she should wait and see what the landscape after being divorced will look like for her. And the other thing is that when you hear $7 million, you're just like, oh, that's just like so much money. And of course it is. But to people that live this lifestyle, and you could argue that they shouldn't, but for people that live this lifestyle, that money doesn't necessarily go that far. Again, we could talk about excess and all those kinds, but even just security alone could be a lot of money. I don't know. So I just wanted to provide that. I've been taking a little bit of notes so I don't forget. So is she lying? Was she lying when she talked about the charity? I don't know. I'll wait till I get to that point. It becomes more and more questionable as to whether or not she's lying about it, because I think it's a viable excuse. Now, could one, if they in the moment were just like, I don't want to be accused of being a gold digger. And so I'm just, and I'm going through something really, really hard, which is divorce, can be really awful. And I'm being attacked on the internet by all the Johnny Depp apologists. So I'm just going to say that, no, I'm not trying to get this money because I'm a gold digger. And that's just a really weird position that we put women in anyway, right? It's not taking Johnny's money, okay? They're a couple and they share assets. And if she earned a lot of assets while they were married, she would be giving him money. You know what I mean? It's not giving of money. And I say this because I would work with a lot of couples as they were going, and individuals as they were going through divorce. And one of the things that I learned early in my career was I had to de-brainwash women while they were going through a divorce regarding the assets that were rightfully theirs. Because a lot of women will just have this internalized notion that they don't deserve it. And it's like them begging their husband to give them money post-divorce. And it's like, no, according to the law and justice, as a couple, when you work together as a couple, you share everything. You share debt, you share income, you share a house, you share the bills. You're equally responsible for things, for child rearing. All of it is together. That's why it's legally defined as such. And so just because your husband might have earned more money doesn't mean it was ever his. It was never his to begin with. And the opposite is true. When I talk to men as they're going through a divorce, as they're heading towards that, I go, I have to de-brainwash you of the idea that while you were earning that money during that 25-year marriage, you thought that was your money. It was not your money. It was the together money. Every dollar you earned, she earned half of that. And every dollar she earned, you earned half of that. Now, are there abuses to this system sometimes by people getting more or grasping for more? Absolutely. There's exploitation. So what we're hearing is that they, I think, had a major conflict. He escaped avoidantly. He came back. He was probably, I'm hypothesizing, still boiling over with emotion and not talking about it, not even acknowledging it, but grumpy around her. And she is going to this charity event and she's dressing up nice. My previous point was she's young and she met him when she's 23. And so by the time she gets divorced, she might not really understand how her finances are going to work because she met Johnny when she was so young. And then she's just responding to the hatred and the sexism and misogyny and accusations of being a gold digger. And then she just blurts out, I'm just going to give it all away. And then after a divorce, she's like, actually, because the other thing is that I was thinking that she might have calculated soon after divorce that it's like, wait, if this goes badly between me and Johnny, the way that people are talking in the press, I might not ever get work again. This $7 million, which of course is taxed probably heavily, I might need to depend on this for the rest of my life, right? So I don't know, but I'm just saying. Now, could she have lied? Yeah. That Dr. Curry thinks she's histrionic, and I think Dr. Curry would say that it was likely she was lying because she was trying to get attention. And I've talked about this before, that histrionic people will pathologically lie, meaning that they will lie even when it's very likely they're going to get caught and the lie will not serve them in the end. So it's just like a knee-jerk reaction in the moment because they want a lot of accolades and they do not think it through. And then later, when they're confronted on it, they lie in terms of how to respond. Like because this was years ago, if she had a couple years later as she's starting to get accused of this, she could just say, look, here's the situation. I met Johnny when I was 22. I didn't know how money worked. I've never really had to have a budget. I live a very different life now than I did when I was 22 years old. I had no idea what my career would look like. I'm kind of worried about getting work in the future. And so, yeah, I made that pledge, but I need to rescind that, or I need to severely reduce that, or could I pledge that eventually I'll give that if my career actually survives? If she would have said that, but why didn't she, right? So that's just another thing. Like, at the very least, in terms of the reports, she didn't have the confidence, or maybe no one heard her or something. Anyway, it's just those details. But anyway, so he comes back to the house. She's going to a charity event. She's dressing up. And she says, what do you think? And he looks at her and I think basically communicates, or what she received was, you look like a slut, essentially, I think is what, and she was saying earlier that he would say things along those lines. And, that's classic verbal abuse, classic insecure attachment for people of all genders, but for men in particular. Dog is barking. It's getting nice out, so the dogs spend more time outside. And of course, there's just a lot of sounds and other dogs and squirrels and raccoons and cats to see and bark at. Coyotes. There's coyotes in our yard sometimes. Anyway, do you say coyote or coyote? I say coyote, I guess. So attached insecure individuals, particularly men, are prone to that form of jealousy where in heterosexual relationships, they worry about men looking at their wife and going after their wife, and they themselves are not secure enough to believe that their spouse won't succumb to that, attention. And so jealousy will sneak in there, and the way that it will manifest in the husband's mind, it gets filtered through misogyny and sexism and slut shaming. It's like, oh, you're disgusting, essentially. Instead of saying something like, honey, when you dress, you can dress however you want, but when you dress like that, it triggers my attachment insecurity. That's not your fault. It's totally not your fault. I'm working on it in therapy. But when you dress like, it's going to stress me out. You can dress however you want. I will never tell you, particularly as a man, to dress differently than you want. But I got to tell you, like, if we go out tonight and you're dressed like, I'm not going to be able to relax. I'm going to freak out. Maybe in a year of more therapy, I'll be able to handle that. But I'm so sorry. Okay. Jealousy is okay. You can own it. You can describe it. You can ask for assistance. But to just come after someone and say you look like a slut is abusive, of course, and insulting and blaming someone else for your problems. So they are having that interaction, and we now see that, at least from Amber Heard's account, that Johnny Depp can be mean. Now, do I believe that her story is accurate? Yes, I do, because at least this story is pretty easily visualized. Given what we have heard, the way that Johnny Depp has talked on audio to her, and given that they were probably in a couple week fight sort of thing, I absolutely, and especially the way she just described the way he talks, because he talks in a very obscure, flowery manner, and she described that pretty well. The other thing I'll say is that she, at least from the get-go here, as she starts to get into the stories of how Johnny Depp allegedly was abusive, the way she talks is a little strained, and I'm not sure what that is, and I probably will never know. But of course, some people will say it's evidence that she's lying, because there's a bit of a stuntedness to the way she, earlier when she was talking just about her childhood, it was flowing freely, and that lends itself to a conclusion or a hypothesis that she's telling the truth. Whereas now, there are times when she seems to be, like, breaks are happening in her sentences or in her thoughts, and even in her facial expressions. There seems to be like an incongruence there. I'm not quite sure. And that can indicate lying, because your brain is like trying to piece together this fake story instead of just having a memory and having it come out of your face. You know what I mean? So that's a possibility. But the other possibility is that she's just not very good about talking about this sort of thing, and there's a lot of reasons why that could be. One is that this is potentially a very difficult memory for her, or set of memories for her. And when clients are sitting on my couch and there's no cameras and there's no jury and there's no lawsuit at stake, there's no YouTube, millions of people watching, they will have a hard time talking about their traumas, because there's a lot of distress that happens. There's a lot of shame, a lot of sort of intrusive voices and feelings that come in and say, like, well, you deserved it, or, it's not hallucinations, but these sort of notions that come in and say, your therapist doesn't want to hear about that, just, move past that, these kind of things that happen to people. The other possibility is that if she was legitimately abused, having the abuser in the room while she's telling these stories could be absolutely PTSD triggering. Another aspect to this is that I don't think she's over Johnny entirely. It'd be strange if either one of them, given how fiery their relationship was, I'm guessing that they still have a lot of entanglement, to use a Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith word, which is normal and that's okay. But I think for her, it might be harder for her to just navigate all of that as she's talking. But again, she could be lying. Let's continue.
Good. And he said, yeah, kid, that's what you're putting out there in the world. No one will ever forget that. And that's all they'll see you as. That's what you wanted. That's what you were going for. You know, my dress was low cut. I get it. It's low cut. But I felt, I felt really embarrassed and horrible that I wore that. I felt like, how could I have made that choice? Of course, he's right. You start to believe it. I started to believe that made a lot of sense, of course. But it didn't stop with that. It was clothing in general. And when I walked out of the house, it wasn't just like, hey, you're not allowed to wear that. It was like, oh, really? That's what you're wearing. No wonder you get cast in those roles. No wonder you that's what you are. That's what you're making it.
This lends itself to the hypothesis of bidirectional intimate partner aggression because we've heard accounts and recordings of both people speaking this way to each other. She's recalling many instances in which he would put down her career and put down the way she was dressed, basically saying, you're a has-been, no one likes you. And she has said on audio, there's a lot of evidence, factual evidence and reports from witnesses that she would say the same thing to him. This lends itself to a bidirectional hostility and really just awful. Just imagine that your partner, even at the height of their anger towards you, when you're at the height of a conflict, that they would say such a thing. I mean, the way that these two talk to each other was just incredible. And I, of course, have treated a lot of people like this. And I suspect that for Johnny, at the very least, this wasn't the first time he was like this, right? So let's address that for a second. There are people that will say, well, of course, Johnny Depp is innocent because Amber Heard is the only one of all of his partners that has reported any of this stuff. And the key word there is reported, because you could absolutely see that for Vanessa or for Winona Ryder, right? That they would say, you know what, let's break up, but let's just not get into that because we'll start mudslinging through the press, and I don't want to do that. And especially for Vanessa, I don't want to do that to our kids. So I'm not gonna come forward and say things like that. Who knows? But just the fact that we've never heard other reports. And another thing is when you have an ex who is extremely powerful and wealthy, you don't necessarily want to get into it with them. So, now, again, could it all be lies? Well, the other thing here is that she could be telling the truth now, and I wouldn't be surprised if, at least I don't know, but if someone was to lie and they wanted to convince the jury, they would probably start with true things and then work into the lies, because the true things might be easier to understand. And I'm guessing that is a strategy, that instead of just leading with, the big guns right off the bat, you warm up the jury to the idea that he's abusive. So you tell like more understandable, more believable stories in the beginning, because if you come out with the big guns at the beginning, the jury might be like, well, come on. I mean, because they don't see Johnny that way. But if you lead them down a road like, well, he did this small thing, he did this bigger thing, he did this bigger thing,
And it continued. And then there would be a blow up. And at first it was just to throw something, smash some things. It loves to smash up a place, an apartment, furniture. Is what it started with. Glass, threw glass at me, and I remember it was summer. And he just threw this glass across the kitchen, and it didn't hit me, but it shattered behind me, and I remember thinking that it like very easily could have hit me. And that, calling me a whore, it didn't start with using the whore word, it was just.
All right, so this section of the story, it has some fishiness to it. I don't want to say that she's lying, because I don't know. Again, no one can detect lies, but it's different. The way she talks in this section. Now, is it because it's traumatic for her? Could be. Is it because she's not good about talking about this sort of thing? She's not used to talking about this sort of thing? Could be. But if she's trying to hide something or she's trying to fabricate something, then one could get kind of jumbled as they're presenting the story. Because earlier, when she told a story, it had a beginning, middle, and end. Now she's jumping all over the place. You know, she's saying, well, then it was an explosion. He's yelling at me about my dress, and then it's an explosion, and then it's all about what he did. He started calling me names. He threw something at me. And instead of saying, okay, so I was standing there trying to deal with him, and I was saying, but I want to wear this, and then he did this, and then he did this, and then he picked up a glass and he threw it, you know, like there's a sequence of behaviors. Now, again, she might be traumatized. She has a hard time recalling that. It's also hard for her to remember those things potentially. But if she is lying, then or leaving something out, so a possibility, given what we've heard on the audio recordings, even the ones presented by her team, do we believe that she just sat there being insulted and just went, oh my God, I'm so, you know, in all likelihood, she was triggered, which would be natural, and came after him verbally. And then it escalated. They both escalated from there. You know, like a vision I have in my head is one of the bodyguards, the Johnny Depp bodyguard, the one that actually physically restrained him and pulled him away as Amber Heard was throwing things at him and then punched Johnny. That story told me a lot because they were both unable to separate and screaming at each other and yelling at each other while she was throwing things. Is he capable of occasionally throwing things too? I wouldn't doubt it. But what that says is that it's not just Johnny being this wilting flower as she's doing this to him. There might have been moments like that, but I think a lot of moments behind closed doors, it was, you know, just a lot of really horrible things being said, probably a lot of breaking things. They seemed, you know, that one video of Johnny Depp, and of course we have a lot of accounts from multiple people, witnesses, Johnny himself, of her breaking things and throwing things. So I hold that in my head of like, I wonder if that was like a typical blow up fight between the two of them, where they're both trying to overpower the other person verbally and physically, and both being really hostile and really verbally abusive to each other and occasionally physically abusive to each other. So in this story, do I believe her account that it was just, she was just like, oh, I guess I am dressed badly, or do we think that she fought back verbally, that escalated, and maybe during that incident there were multiple things being thrown at each other? Like that would be my guess. But her story is he escalated, she didn't do anything, and he threw something at her. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to fit, right? Because it doesn't seem to fit the recordings. It doesn't seem to fit the video that he would just look at her in a dress, get, you know, really angry, say some really horrible things, and then pick something up and throw it at her. Like, it's possible.
Comments until it would escalate. And then I started to notice the pattern of escalation where he'd throw glass or turn over a table. Then he would hit the wall, and then he'd hit the wall really close to my head. You know, like when I'm standing there, you know, just hit the wall, screaming at me.
Again, so it's totally possible she's telling the truth. But if I were on the jury, I wouldn't be convinced, because she's not talking about individual instances. Like, and maybe she'll get to it. You know, she would, and with some corroborating evidence, like punching a wall, right? And there's a divot in the drywall or something, where she could say, there was this one time, I'll never forget it, da-da-da, beginning of story, middle of story, end of story, corroborating evidence. I took a picture, or so-and-so saw it. You could talk to them later. So if it's true, it's true. If it's a lie, or mostly a lie, or partially a lie, then this is the sort of thing you would hear from someone, I think.
But then he would disappear and get clean and sober, and he'd come back and tell me that he was done drinking, he was over it, he was done, cleaned himself up, he had done it before, and he'd do it again. And then he would go back to this like wonderful, like almost like just unreal, like real, you know, but unbelievably nice, sensitive, kind, warm.
She's not helping her case with me as she does this, because she's talking about idealization and devaluation. I mean, if she said something like, yeah, and he would turn into the Johnny I know, which is, you know, a really great guy with some flaws, but, you know, he's a good, you know, something like that. But you hear the way she's describing it. Now, can someone with borderline be abused? Yes. In fact, they have higher rates of being victimized. But it calls into question whether or not she has borderline, and it also calls into question her behavior in the moments and her interpretation of what happens in the moment. So I hope you hear that, right? And I don't know if that's what's happening, but she seems to be viscerally connecting with this notion that there were times when he would just become this shining beacon of wonderfulness, and that is often a presentation of the borderline idealization. And then, of course, we've heard on audio when I think she was devaluing him.
Generous, interesting, funny man that I loved. And he would make me feel so loved. Like I would feel so distant from that thing that was so scary that I would not even recognize it too.
Again, splitting. Now, can you be abused by someone, not have borderline, and almost see your partner as two different people? Yeah, absolutely. But if we're going on the hypothesis of a borderline diagnosis, which there's a lot of lines of evidence pointing towards, then she is describing splitting pretty well right now. She's saying there were times when he was the most wonderful, kind, intelligent, warm, inviting, just so great. So much so that when I thought about that other him, it's like unrecognizable. That's splitting. You've heard me talk about that. In brief, when we are young, like 6 months old, 12 months old, and to a lesser degree moving forward, we look at our caregivers in that way. There's the warm and loving and satiating and always there and kind and soft and supportive and attention-giving mother, and then there's that other mother that makes me go to bed early and isn't there when I wake up from a nap and won't give me the extra cookie, or all those kinds of things, or won't solve my discomfort with my diaper, and that's all mother's faults, and it's just exaggerating, but not really that far off what is possible. And so at least theory goes, and there's a fair amount of developmental science evidence along these lines, that the child actually will split. They'll separate these two mothers, and if things are going well over time, those two mothers will actually become one mother. But it takes a lot of attunement and a lack of abuse and space and reflection of the child, a lot of experience with the full range of mother. Oh, you're doing something that annoys me right now, but you're not a different person. You're still you. You're still a good person, but you're doing something that annoys me right now. How do I marry those two? I don't, it's a gray zone, if you will. And when you have borderline, you were denied that developmental task. You retain that throughout your life until you recover, and she's describing that experience very well. I don't know if that's what's happening, but if I were to give a lecture on borderline, I would say, I don't know if she has borderline, but listen to this, because that's a strong indication of it.
And that was how, our relationship kind of started to develop in that first year.
Do you remember the first time that he physically hit you?
Yes.
Please tell the jury about it.
It was it's seemingly so stupid, so insignificant. I will never forget it. It changed my life.
Again, I don't know. I don't know if I'm just sort of biased because so many people have been telling me that she's a liar, and so it's hard for me to, and I'm really trying hard not to give in to that influence. But the way that she tells her story, maybe she'll pull out of the sort of weird direction she's going in, but just those little phrases, like if you ask me a question, of, tell me what you did this morning, I'd be like, okay, well, I actually woke up really early for some reason, and I couldn't fall back asleep, which bothered me because I thought, oh boy, I'm not going to be able to do any work today because I'm going to be real tired. And then I looked at Facebook or Reddit for a bit, and then I said, screw it, I'll get up, because actually the dog started barking to go outside. So okay, I'll get up, and I got up. So that's me telling a story, right? There's no kind of weirdness to that. Not much anyway. There's a beginning, middle, and end, and there's a logical sort of sequence to it. The way she starts this story is, if she were calculating how to tell this. Now, the other thing is, the other hypothesis, in addition to the other ones I've mentioned, is that both of them have been heavily coached. We know that, right? We know that they have gone over this testimony with their lawyers over and over and over again, and been coached on what to say, like directing, right? And they have their lines. For her, it might actually be kind of harder for her to remember, okay, remember to say this, okay, I got to make sure that, and be believable, and make sure that I don't seem cold, because that's what the lawyers are telling. You just imagine that really tripping her up. So maybe that's happening, but there's a possibility also that she's having a hard time piecing everything together because it's not true. I don't know.
I was sitting on the couch, and we were talking. We were having a normal conversation, just, there was no fighting, no argument, nothing. And he was drinking, and I didn't realize at the time, but I think he was using cocaine, because it was like there was a jar of cocaine out on the table. I realize that sounds weird. But
so these details seem to be flowing out very smoothly, and I believe that, and I believe that Johnny Depp even talked about such things, of having a lot of cocaine around and drinking a lot. So you hear her cadence. It seems to be, and the emotion. It was a jar. People, like, really, it was it seems to flow more.
it's like an actual vintage jar of it. But I didn't see him use it at the time, so I didn't really factor that in. I just, he's drinking and we're talking, and there's music playing, and he's smoking cigarettes, and we're sitting next to each other on the couch. And I asked him about the tattoo he has on his arm. And to me, it just looked like black marks. I didn't know what it said.
Okay. Now, she could be telling the truth. But given what we know about her factually up at this, or just even humans in general, his tattoo of Winona was famous. So the possibility that they're just having this fun time, and she just looks at one of his tattoos and goes like, I think she's about to say like, what's going on with that or something. That doesn't sound believable. So one of the things that will happen with people with borderline and histrionic to some extent was that they're in a constant state of hypervigilance and feeling like rejection is around every corner, right? But when they are using substances, and I'm guessing she was drinking too. I mean, there were a lot of accounts. She hasn't described her drinking or drugging, so who knows? She could have been sober. She hasn't described that. But so with substances, that worry starts to mute. And also, the closer you feel to your attachment figure, the safer you feel. So that fear starts to go down. It never dissipates completely, of course, but it goes down. And when that happens, a lot of times for people with borderline, all of these cataloged issues that the borderline individual didn't feel safe enough to express before when they were in this constant state of distress will start coming out. It's like this backlog of things that they've been putting off about asking their partner about. I don't know, of course, I'm speculating heavily, but that would be my hypothesis, that they were connecting, she was drinking, he was drinking, and maybe he was in a really good mood, he's using cocaine, and then she starts to feel more secure, more attachment security, more attachment safety, and then she's like, and we could imagine that she probably knew about the tattoo of Winona Ryder, that he changed to Wino forever. Who knows? But I'm just speculating upon speculation that she knew that or suspected it or something, and probably said something to him along the lines of, can you get rid of that tattoo? I don't want to see that. Like we can imagine her getting closer and closer, and then all of a sudden, boom, tattoo. Like it just ruins it. And for people with borderline, little things like that will just completely destroy them. They'll just go. It's black and white. They'll just go off a cliff, and then of course they get really hurt. And then they get really angry. We heard from Johnny Depp in his testimony saying that his tattoos are a journal. And I think I don't think he really drove it home enough. But the way I interpreted that was the Winona and the Wino Forever tattoo was a journal of his past. He was with Winona for a while, and that was an important relationship to him in his younger years. And then when he changed it, that also is a record of his life. And I'm guessing she told him in either nicely or in a pointed way to get rid of the tattoo or something, or cover it up, or I don't want to see it, or whatever. And then he took offense to it and probably wasn't pleasant about it. Who knows? That triggered her, and then we're off to the races. So but I'm just guessing. And some of you Amber supporters out there might say, you didn't do this with Johnny. You didn't scrutinize every story of Johnny's in the same way. And you'd be right. Am I biased? Now, another part of this is that I feel like I know so much more about this couple by the time I get to her testimony. And if I would go back, which I won't do because I don't have the time, and watch Johnny's testimony, I'm guessing I might actually start to question. Because when I heard his testimony, I didn't really have a lot of data to refute what he was saying, but I do, and I'm sure I will have more data to refute what he was saying. So I think that's another factor.
It just looked like muddled, faded tattoo that was hard to read. And I said, what does it say? And he said it says Wino. It says Wino. And I didn't see that. I thought he was joking.
So these videos are going to turn me into a hack who analyzes body language and claims that he can tell when people are lying, which is just one of the most hacky things one could do. So I'm not going to do that. And I've said this earlier that I can't remember the YouTube channel that I was watching briefly. The body language expert was actually not making claims. He was just saying, well, this, he was talking like I do. He was like, well, maybe this, maybe that. But a lot of the other, if not all the other ones that I've seen will just be like, see that indicates that. And they'll be like, science. And it's like, that's not science anyway. So, but we'll rewind that. And what happened in her head was notable, that you can tell when their gears are turning. Let's rewind that.
I didn't know what it said. It just looked like muddled, faded tattoo that was hard to read. And I said, what does it say? And he said it says Wino. It says Wino. And I didn't see that. I thought he was joking because it didn't look like it said that at all. And I laughed. It was that simple. I just laughed because I thought he was joking.
It doesn't look right to me. I don't know. I obviously must be biased on some level. It just doesn't look right to me because I think she's trying to tell a real story. I'm guessing there's stuff she's leaving out because I think she's going to claim that she just inquired like just a regular curious person. Oh, what's that tattoo? And he said, it says Wino. And she laughed because she thought he was joking. And, it's possible. It certainly doesn't sound like a real story, but, who knows? The more likely story is that she knew what she was going after and, wasn't necessarily being abusive or anything, but was criticizing or saying, I don't like that or something. He said, it's Wino and it doesn't say Winona anymore or something. And get off my back. This is my tattoo. And then that triggered her. And then she started to laugh out of ridicule or something, like to ridicule him about the tattoo. Now, I think she's going to lead up to a point where he was physical with her. And that part actually might be true, but they were probably escalating together. And then now, is it possible that he was the only one violent during this story? Yeah, it is possible. Absolutely. I can see that. But the way she tells this story, it just doesn't make sense. When, like the story when Johnny Depp was saying her birthday and I called her and it was this really important meeting. And then I arrived and she was, talking into my ear, kind of quiet. And she was saying some really nasty things. Like the story makes sense, right? You can see that happening. This story, it's like, huh? You look at a tattoo, perhaps his most famous tattoo, of the famous tattoos of, at least my generation, that's got to be, top 3, honestly. Like, that was a huge story back in the day. And one, because not a lot of people had tattoos back then. Two, that he had Winona's name tattooed on his body. It's like, well, that's commitment. And then they break up and he had to change it. Anyway, so we're supposed to believe she had no idea. We're supposed to believe that she just inquired about it and that he said it. And then I just laughed. Like, it just, it's possible, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, some of you might be saying, I had no idea about Johnny Depp's tattoo. I don't even really know anything about him. I didn't know him and Winona were together. I didn't even know he had tattoos. That's you, which I would get. But that's his girlfriend or wife at the time. She obviously worships him. I'm guessing she knew. I'm just going to take a guess and say that of all the tattoos on his body, and given her issues that seemed to be present, she knew that one was there and wasn't just inquiring like, what's that tattoo?
And slapped me across the face. And I laughed. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. I thought, this must be a joke.
Now, do I believe that he slapped her? I could see that. I could see that he slapped her. I could see, like I said, her side of the story being very different. Now, could someone with borderline and histrionic remember it this way? Absolutely. I've been over that ground. One, memories are weird anyway, and every couple that comes into my office, when they describe a past conflict, they both remember, particularly when there's more abuse in their history, they remember completely different stories. It's like they weren't even in the same room together. It's like they were interacting with some clone of their partner. And one person will tell me, this whole story, the other person tells me, and it's like I have a really hard time meshing these two stories. Yeah, that's normal. Also, memory is weird, but when you have a personality disorder, it's a disorder of perception usually. And so everything that happens and everything that you do and every encoding of memory and every recall of memory is filtered through this defense system of borderline and of how things feel. So if I was to take a guess, we had a video camera of this, we would see what I said earlier in terms of what she did, which wasn't horrible, but it was critical or something. I think he's particularly sensitive about his tattoos and what he calls to be like his journal. I think his tattoos, the way he was talking, I think they're very sentimental to him. I think they're very important to him. Like, it's like the Winona or Wino tattoo, it symbolizes his connection with certain people that he desperately wants to hold on to. He has another tattoo of one of his children or something. It's his way, I think, of holding on to. And we could imagine, actually, for Johnny, that all the travel, because he worked a lot. I actually did a scan of all the movies that he's been in over the years. He's been in a lot of movies, and a lot of really big movies. I was surprised. It's not a lot. Is actors where I'll be like, oh yeah, I've seen a third of those movies. With him, I think I've seen 90% of the movies that he's been in. But I mean, I don't know what that says. But my point is that if you're traveling a lot and you're cut off from your people and your kids, then it's gonna feel bad. You're gonna be lonely, and so these tattoos, might have this really big significance to him, and which I could absolutely see. And she pokes at it emotionally and verbally. He does get angry because he is high and drunk at the time. They both start to escalate. She starts to say something like the way she talks, and he starts to talk the way he talks, C word and all the stuff that they do to each other. And then he could have slapped her because she might have said something like, that needs to go, or, something, who knows. And is it possible that there was no violence from her whatsoever, no threat of violence, and he just slapped her out of the blue as they were escalating and yelling at each other? Yeah, I could absolutely see that.
This must be a joke, because I didn't know what was going on. I just stared at him, kind of laughing still, thinking that he was going to start laughing too to tell me it was a joke, but he didn't. He said, "You think it's so funny? You think it's funny, bitch? You think you're a funny bitch?" And he slapped me again. Like, I wasn't clear. It wasn't a joke anymore.
Okay, I mean, the way her cadence sounds believable, I'll say that. That last bit sounded there's a little bit of a speed bump there. But now, could it also be that she's leaving out the fact that she hit him first or along the way or threw something at him? Yeah, I mean, given my suspicion that she's leaving out a lot of things in this story, then it's possible she left that out too. But anyway, if I was on the jury, this story, I would start to listen to this because, I don't know, it sounds believable to some extent.
And I stopped laughing, but I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what to do. You would think you would have a response, but I, as a woman, had never been hit like that. I'm an adult, and I'm sitting next to the man I love, and he slapped me for no reason, it seemed like, and I missed the point. It was that stupid. Second slap, I know he's not kidding, but I don't know what else to say or do, so I just stared at him. I didn't say anything. I didn't react. I didn't move or...
Totally possible. I wasn't there, and I don't want to do what a lot of people do, mainly men, and discount a woman's story of victimization. I'm well aware of that landscape for sure. But I wouldn't be surprised if what really happened was that he did slap her at least once, maybe twice, but at least once. And that, yes, she was laughing, and yes, she was staring at him in the face, and yes, she was surprised that he did it. But the tone of all those things was quite different. The laughing was not just like, ha ha ha, uncomfortable laughter. It was ridicule, because we've heard a lot of that from her on the audio. I'm guessing that the staring at him was threatening, or I don't know, trying to front in some way. Not that she wasn't scared, because I can't imagine her not being scared.
Freak out or defend myself or say, what are you doing? You're crazy. I just stared at him because I didn't know what else to do. And he slaps me one more time. Hard. I lose my balance. At this point, we're sitting next to each other on the edge of the couch, or I was on the edge of the couch. And I'm all of a sudden realizing that the worst thing has just happened to me that could possibly happen to you. I realized that I wish so much he had said he was joking, because it didn't hurt. It didn't physically hurt me. I was just sitting there on this carpet, looking at the dirty carpet, wondering how I wound up on this carpet and why I never noticed that the carpet was so filthy before, and I just didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to react. I just sat there thinking, how much time do I have till I figure out what I need to do? Because, God, did he just hit me?
Seems believable. I think you could find a lot of people that would look at that and say that looks fake, but I don't know. That seems believable to me. There's some details in there. Could she have been coached to provide those details to make it seem believable? Yeah. I mean, we just have to remember that both of them, like I said, have told all these stories multiple times to practice what to say. I'm just taking a guess. But I don't know. That sounds believable to me.
No, I didn't want to leave him. I didn't want this to be the reality. I didn't want to have the man I was in love with. I know you don't come back from that. I'm not dumb. I know you can't hit a woman. You can't hit a man. You can't hit anyone. You can't just hit somebody because I knew it was wrong.
I feel like I'm a conspiracy theorist at this point and just like looking for clues. I'm Charlie Day in the mailroom with all the yarn and the thumbtacks and everything. What was it? It's all Debbie O'Malley, or what was the thing he was saying? Anyway, I'm sure that's not the name, but as she gets into this section, it's more disjointed. There's not a flow to what she's saying. Is that because she's trying to fit in a lot of details because she was told that she needs to, or is it because she's trying to piece together a lot of different elements to a performance? The face, the crying, the tone of voice, the details, the storyline. Look at their face. Is she trying to fabricate something? And I have to say that if I was on the jury at this point, I'd be like, I don't know. But she said, I know that you can't hit a woman. And I'm like, well, that's an interesting phrase. What? you can hit a man, you know? And of course, there's a lot of people that believe that kind of nonsense, that somehow violence applies differently to different human beings. And having said that, well, you know what I know. Anyway, point is that, and then she follows up, well, I know you can't hit a man. You know, am I just a conspiracy theorist for looking at that detail and saying, like, was that a slip of her attitude, or that she did throw something at him thinking, you can't hit a woman. I can hit you, but you can't hit me. I don't know. Yeah.
And I knew that I had to leave him. And that's what broke my heart. Because I didn't want to leave him. I thought if I got up out of that room, I would leave the best thing that ever happened to me.
That bit seems believable. I think she's telling the truth there. Or at least it fits with my hypothesis about what really happened. That she didn't want to leave him. That it did break her heart. And that she was deeply attached to him. Because she met him when she was so young, it's possible that he was her first real true love, so to speak, right? I don't know. Maybe she had previous relationships in which she had a deeper love, but I don't have any doubt that in this moment she was heavily conflicted, and that recollection of those emotions is real, and that she might even still feel that way, as I was saying earlier.
He's crying. Tears, just falling out of his eyes. He gets down on his knees and he grabs my hands and he's touching my hands and he's saying to me, I will never do that again. I'm so sorry, baby. I put the fucker away. I thought I killed it and it's done. I thought I put the monster away and I've done it before. It's done.
Okay, that sounds believable too. The way she's saying it, and it's consistent with some audio recordings and some texts that we've seen. The monster, could it be a calculated lie to coincide with his flowery language, perhaps? But I don't know. I could absolutely see that happening given everything that we've heard. Does that mean that everything he was claiming and alleging is false? Yeah, you can make your own call on that. But do I believe that in all of their conflicts and all of their scuffles, that he, at least one time, if not more than once, hauled off and hit her as hard as he could, and he's bigger and could put more force behind it, and it knocked her over, and then he immediately felt bad about it? Yeah, I could absolutely see that happening. I want to contrast that with the way Amber Heard responded to when Johnny Depp had to point out, you hit me. On that recording, she says, I didn't punch you, I hit you, and you're a baby. So we heard that. She said that. She hit him, whatever word you want to put to that, and wasn't taking responsibility for it. And he had to beg her to take responsibility for it. And she not only didn't take responsibility for it and minimized it, but she ridiculed him and called him a baby and all sorts of other names, right? Now, who knows? Maybe at other times she did take responsibility and did apologize, but we just have to think about that. And I think it's one of those incidents where inadvertently the Amber Heard team and herself are actually not helping their case, because he immediately, it's wrong to have hit her. That's abusive. It's criminal. That's a crime. Call the police, handcuffs. That's a crime. It's wrong. It's damaging. It's immoral. And yeah, but he apologized for it right afterwards. Doesn't negate it. If someone did that to me, I'd be like, well, thanks, but you still did it. And yet, she did not. There was no accounts of her ever apologizing. Maybe she did. But again, we heard that audio recording, and we can imagine that wasn't the only time that happened, right? Who knows? But I could see the jury at this point anyway saying, okay, do I believe he hit her? Sure. Do I believe that she didn't do anything aggressive verbally at all? Doesn't justify hitting her at all. Zero. But do we believe her account that she was just laughing uncomfortably instead of doing what we heard on the tape? Probably not. But do we believe that she triggered him and he did a criminal act and hit her? Yeah. Do we believe that he apologized for it? Sure. But when we think about the whole story, it's probably that was the exception and not the rule in terms of who was hitting who, right? All right. Well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.